Nestor will represent Robinson in federal court in his trial. He is charged with first-degree murder and weapons offenses for killing Kirk at a campus event. The state of Utah has said it will seek the death penalty.
And just when everyone thought the case was locked down, a shocking twist hit the headlines. Claims that Tyler Robinson, the man accused of ending Charlie Kirk's life, somehow walked free. People are furious, social media is exploding, and the question tearing through every comment section right now is simple. Did the system really let him go, or is this just another viral lie hiding the real story? Because what we uncovered changes everything. It all started on a September night in Utah when Charlie Kirk, the outspoken activist and founder of Turning Point USA, took the stage at Utah Valley University. The crowd expected a fiery speech, but in a matter of seconds, the room turned to chaos. Shots rang out, screams filled the air, and within moments, Kirk was down. The news spread instantly. A man known nationwide for his controversial voice had been silenced in front of a live audience. Police rushed in, witnesses panicked, and America woke up the next morning to headlines that felt like something ripped out of a movie script. But what came after wasn't just tragedy, it was confusion, finger-pointing, and rumors that would spiral completely out of control. As the dust settled that night, investigators scrambled to piece together exactly what had happened inside the auditorium. Witnesses described chaos. Some swore they saw a figure rushing toward the exits. Others said they only heard the gunfire before ducking for cover. Cell phone clips flooded social media within minutes, showing panicked students, flashing sirens, and police storming the building. The nation was glued to its screens, and in that blur of shaky footage, one name began to rise above the rest: Tyler Robinson. Authorities confirmed within days that the two-year-old was their prime suspect. His image was shared across every platform, his background pulled apart by strangers who knew nothing about him, and his digital life was suddenly under the world's microscope. News outlets plastered his face with bold captions like "Killer Identified" and "Shooter in Custody." Yet, even with an arrest, questions multiplied. Was he truly the man behind the gun? Did investigators have ironclad proof? Or were they chasing a convenient suspect to calm public outrage? For law enforcement, this was a race against time to convince the public they had the right person. For the internet, it was an open invitation to create a narrative of its own. And in that frenzy, the line between fact and rumor started to vanish. Some online voices argued Robinson had already slipped through the cracks, that somehow he had been released or never properly detained in the first place. A dangerous story was forming, one that didn't match what the courts were saying, but was too explosive for people to ignore. But that wasn't the end of the mystery. So who exactly is Tyler Robinson? On paper, he was just another two-year-old from Utah, a name no one outside his circle would have recognized. But overnight, he became the most searched man in America. Reporters began chasing every scrap of information they could find: yearbook photos, old social media accounts, distant relatives who barely remembered him. Even the smallest detail became headline material. One article mentioned his quiet demeanor in high school. Another suggested he'd grown withdrawn in recent years. Spending most of his time online in gaming forums, neighbors described him in conflicting ways. Some painted him as the quiet kid who never caused trouble, while others claimed they always sensed something off. The more people spoke, the blurrier the picture became. That uncertainty only fueled speculation. On Reddit threads and Discord servers, strangers pieced together half-truths, screenshots, and conspiracy maps. To some, he was an obsessed loner, radicalized online. To others, he was a scapegoat, framed by a system desperate to show quick results. The power of the internet is that it can build an entire identity from fragments. One leaked photo, one rumor about his gaming history, one out-of-context post, suddenly millions of people felt like they knew Tyler Robinson. But none of that information came from sworn testimony, from forensics, or from courtrooms. It came from the whirlwind of online obsession. And that's where the cracks began to form. Because while investigators were quietly building their legal case, the online mob was already convinced. Some swore he was the cold-blooded killer who planned it for weeks. Others believed he was innocent, that the real shooter had slipped away in the chaos, and that Robinson's arrest was nothing more than a smokescreen. It didn't matter that the courts insisted otherwise. The narrative had taken on a life of its own. And then came the turning point, the moment when whispers about Robinson's so-called freedom exploded into viral headlines that millions believed. When police finally moved in on Tyler Robinson, they didn't treat it like a quiet arrest. This was a full-scale operation. Helicopters tracked his movements, tactical teams surrounded the location, and within minutes, the suspect at the center of America's outrage was in handcuffs. News outlets confirmed it. Robinson had been captured. Court documents soon followed, listing some of the most serious charges the state could throw at a defendant: aggravated murder, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and more. Prosecutors didn't just want a conviction. They signaled they were prepared to seek the ultimate penalty, the kind reserved for the rarest and most brutal of crimes. But here's the problem. While the justice system was moving step by step through official channels, the internet was sprinting in the opposite direction. Somewhere between the mugshot and the first court appearance, a rumor spread that Robinson had been released. No one could trace the origin. Maybe it was a misread court document, maybe it was someone deliberately planting chaos online, but it spread like fire. A single headline screaming "walks free" was enough to erase hours of legitimate reporting. Within minutes, hashtags claiming Robinson had escaped or been quietly released were trending worldwide. The courts pushed back, confirming he was still in custody, but by then, it almost didn't matter. For millions of people scrolling headlines, the damage was done. They saw "walks free," and that was the version they believed. It didn't matter that Robinson was behind bars awaiting trial. It didn't matter that a judge had ordered strict protective measures, even granting safeguards for Charlie Kirk's widow. None of that matched the story the internet wanted. And this is where things turn dangerous. Because once people start believing a killer is walking free, anger turns to rage. Threats flood courthouses, rumors of vigilante justice swirl, and conspiracy theories multiply. Robinson wasn't just an accused man anymore. He was the centerpiece of a battle between truth and narrative, fact and fiction. But that wasn't the only fuel on the fire. The real chaos started when reporters dug into Robinson's digital trail, and what they claimed to find shocked everyone. The moment reporters got access to Robinson's alleged digital history, the story turned even darker. According to court filings and leaks splashed across news sites, investigators uncovered a string of bizarre online searches terms so disturbing they couldn't be ignored. Headlines claimed Robinson had been browsing violent fantasies, fringe forums, and even role-playing games with themes that blurred the line between fiction and obsession. One outlet reported he played in a niche online game where players acted out twisted scenarios. Another pointed to chat logs, where his screen name appeared alongside troubling comments. But here's where the line between fact and speculation matters. Yes, prosecutors mentioned electronic evidence, but much of what the public saw came from journalists piecing together bits of leaked information. Screenshots without context, usernames that could belong to anyone, and sources close to the investigation painting a picture without hard proof. It's powerful fuel for outrage, but in court, that's not always enough. Still, the narrative was irresistible. Commentators began spinning theories. Maybe Robinson was radicalized through online communities. Maybe he'd been targeting Kirk for months. Maybe he wasn't even acting alone. Each new leak gave rise to 10 more rumors. Some argued the digital trail was proof of guilt beyond doubt. Others warned it was too neat, that it looked more like a setup than a smoking gun. And yet, even with all the noise, one thing became clear. Investigators were taking the online evidence seriously. They pulled in cyber experts, subpoenaed accounts, and followed every suspicious lead. But despite the frenzy, the Justice Department stepped in to remind the public. So far, there was no verified connection between Robinson and any organized political group. This wasn't some grand conspiracy with a shadowy network pulling strings, at least not yet. That didn't stop the speculation, though, because every time officials tried to calm the storm, the internet only got louder. And soon, the case wasn't just about Robinson or Kirk, it was about how America itself was reacting to the idea of justice. But the biggest twist was still to come, because the politics of this case would drag the story into territory no one expected. It didn't take long before the courtroom battle turned into a political battlefield. Almost immediately, commentators on both sides of the spectrum began twisting the tragedy to fit their own narratives. For some, Robinson was the symbol of a radicalized youth, proof that extremist voices online were turning ordinary young men into killers. For others, the case smelled like a setup, a convenient villain handpicked to silence public outrage and protect the real forces behind the crime. Cable news shows filled entire segments speculating about motives that prosecutors hadn't even confirmed in court. Politicians began weighing in too, using Kirk's death as ammunition in debates about gun laws, campus security, and freedom of speech. To conservatives, Kirk was a martyr, a man silenced for daring to speak out. To critics, the focus wasn't on Kirk at all, but on the system that allowed the attack to unfold in the first place. Every angle was amplified, every detail stretched. And then came the Justice Department's announcement they had no evidence tying Robinson to an organized political group. It should have been a clarifying moment, a chance to cut through the noise, but instead, it only fueled suspicion. To some, it proved Robinson acted alone. To others, it was proof of a cover-up, the government hiding the truth to keep the public calm. Online, hashtags accusing officials of lying began trending, while talk show hosts turned the DOJ's statement into a punchline. Meanwhile, the victim's family became unwilling pawns in the media storm. Charlie Kirk's widow filed for protective measures, granted swiftly by the court, but even that turned into content for pundits who spun it into more speculation. The human side of the story was lost in the roar of politics. It wasn't about grief or justice anymore, it was about winning the narrative. And the deeper the country sank into that narrative war, the harder it became to separate fact from fiction. Robinson wasn't just an accused man waiting for trial. He was now a symbol depending on who you listen to, either a monster, a scapegoat, or a puppet of forces bigger than himself. But while the headlines grew louder, there were strange details that didn't fit neatly into either narrative. And those unanswered questions would become the next explosive chapter of this case. The deeper people dug into the case, the more strange contradictions began to surface. Some witnesses swore Robinson matched the figure they saw fleeing the scene, while others insisted the shooter's build didn't line up. A few even claimed there were multiple figures in the chaos, though police never confirmed that. Those conflicting accounts gave conspiracy forums endless fuel, with entire timelines being redrawn based on nothing more than shadows and blurry cell phone footage. Then, there were the social media posts. Screenshots allegedly tied to Robinson popped up everywhere, some showing disturbing jokes about violence, others hinting at resentment toward Kirk's politics. But here's the catch. Digital forensics experts warned many of these posts could have been doctored or even planted after the fact. Fake accounts with Robinson's name surfaced on platforms he'd never officially used, making it nearly impossible to know which ones were real and which ones were manufactured to stoke outrage. Family statements added another wrinkle. Relatives who spoke to reporters described him in dramatically different ways. One painted him as quiet and misunderstood, another as increasingly unstable in recent months. Those contradictions only deepened the mystery. Was Robinson the villain the headlines portrayed, or a young man caught in the storm of a narrative he couldn't control? And perhaps the most haunting detail was the timeline itself. Some investigators privately admitted there were gaps in the security footage, minutes unaccounted for between the chaos and Robinson's supposed escape route. Nothing definitive, nothing proven, but enough to make people wonder if the full story had yet to be revealed. All of these cracks didn't just confuse the public, they weaponized uncertainty. For those who wanted Robinson guilty, every screenshot was proof. For those who thought he was framed, every contradiction was evidence of a cover-up. And in that tug of war, the truth slipped further out of reach. But as wild as the unanswered questions were, they paled compared to what happened next when the trial process itself threatened to flip the entire case upside down. Once the courtroom doors opened, the case took on an entirely new dimension. What the public thought it knew from headlines suddenly clashed with the slow, deliberate rhythm of the justice system. Prosecutors came forward with their charges: aggravated murder, obstruction, tampering, the kind of charges that carry the weight of life or even death. They promised to bring evidence that would leave no doubt, but defense attorneys fired back immediately, demanding transparency, pointing out inconsistencies and warning the jury pool not to swallow the narrative spoon-fed by the media. This is the part most people forget in a courtroom. Rumors don't matter. Leaked screenshots, viral hashtags, and trending videos mean nothing unless they can be authenticated, introduced, and survive cross-examination. A blurry post on a message board might dominate headlines, but in front of a judge, it's just noise without proof. And this is where the walks free rumor, as absurd as it may seem, became dangerous. Because juries are made of ordinary citizens. If enough people believe Robinson had already been freed, that perception bleeds into the trial itself, shaping opinions before the first piece of evidence is presented. The judge understood this risk, which is why strict protective orders were put in place, including safeguards for Charlie Kirk's widow. The court wanted to shield the trial from the media circus, but in the age of social media, that's almost impossible. Every new filing was dissected online within minutes. Every delay spun into a conspiracy. And while Robinson sat in custody awaiting his fate, millions believed he was already a free man. But here's the brutal truth. Trials have a way of flipping the script. Evidence that seems airtight in the headlines can crumble under cross-examination. Witnesses who appear confident can contradict themselves on the stand, and details everyone thought were clear can suddenly take on new meaning when challenged by forensic experts. That's why so many high-profile cases end in shock, because the public's version of events rarely matches what can actually be proven. And so, while the internet rushed to write the ending, the real story was still being written inside that courtroom. Every hearing, every filing, every witness mattered. The walks free narrative may have dominated TikTok and Twitter, but in reality, Robinson's future hung on whether the prosecution's evidence could withstand the harsh light of trial. But even with all that, one final twist would make people question everything they thought they knew, not about Robinson, but about how public memory itself is shaped. So here we are, a nation split between rumor and reality, between headlines designed to shock and a justice system moving at its own careful pace. Tyler Robinson didn't walk free. He sits in custody, facing the most serious charges the state can bring. But in the court of public opinion, perception often matters more than truth. A single viral phrase, "walks free," was enough to rewrite the story in millions of minds. And once a false memory takes hold, it's nearly impossible to erase. That's the real danger here. Not just what happened inside that auditorium, not just the evidence investigators claim to have, but the way the internet builds and spreads its own version of events. A rumor becomes a headline becomes a belief, and suddenly, an entire case can feel decided before the trial even begins. For Robinson, for Kirk's family, and for the justice system itself, that's a problem that could shape the outcome in ways no one expects. So, the question now isn't only whether Robinson is guilty or innocent. The deeper question is this: can the truth survive in a world where the loudest narrative always wins? That's what this case is really about. And until the gavel comes down, all we have are facts on one side, speculation on the other, and a future that could shock everyone once the verdict finally lands.